thing is set in Scranton, which is often nicknamed the Electric City. Angelo knew there was trouble from the frantic gait of Franny's walk, how she shoved open the glass doors of the Ritz and scanned the lobby, not with familiarity, but with panic. She locked eyes with him, manning the concession stand in his red bow tie, and marched in his direction, her flats squeaking across the polished floors. Little Jimmy made for the register, but Angelo told him, "I got it." They'd already started the late show on both screens, Jaws 2 and Capricorn 1, and the Ritz was dead even for a Thursday night. Angelo. Franny set her enormous black purse on the counter. "It's Frankie, he's in trouble." Angelo told little Jimmy to go mop the bathrooms. Then he retrieved his toothpick from behind his ear and set it over his lower lip, between two chalky molars. He'd been best friends with Frankie and Franny ever since they were kids, had marched up the aisle of St. Anthony's with them to receive their first Holy Communions. They were 23 years old now, and most of their friends had long ago retreated into back-breaking jobs at Toby Hanna or Scranton Lace. Franny served up soda pop at Abe's Jewish around the corner. Frankie ran the numbers. Angelo worked here in the movie theater. "What happened?" he asked. "He won't tell me exactly," she said, "but he says it's bad, real bad. He's holed up at the Silver Trolley, refuses to see me, says he needs to see you. I think it's..." She paused and glanced around to make sure little Jimmy was gone. "I think it's you-know-who." Angelo opened the popcorn machine and grabbed a handful of perfectly popped kernels. He'd long ago perfected how to chew popcorn in one side of his mouth while maintaining his toothpick in the other. He hadn't seen Frankie since last Sunday, when they bumped into each other at Whiskey Dick's and watched the Phils surrender 4 runs to Atlanta. One thing led to another, and Angelo almost had to call out of work the next afternoon. "You know who," he repeated. "So what, he wants me to come see him after work?" Franny shook her head, and again Angelo's eyes drifted to the Hooper one-sheet hanging above, and its smirking Burt Reynolds watching them from some great beyond. "No, I just talked with him. He needs to see you now, right now." It was 9:45. The Silver Trolley was on the other side of downtown, near the Lackawanna River and the bus station. If Angelo timed it right, he could be back in time to chase the winos out during the credits of Capricorn 1. He placed his hand over Franny's and looked into her red eyes, the pupils of someone who had obviously been crying. He remembered in 8th grade how they danced together at the year-end celebration, a rinky-dink affair in the auditorium of a nunnery, how Sister Lucy shoved a ruler between their bodies and shouted, "Leave space for the Holy Ghost." He squeezed her hand now and said, "Don't worry, I'll go help them." Okay, let's hear it from Paul.
I shall be reading something super lighthearted that was just published in the Star Tribune. So this will be the only downer, hopefully, of the night. But bear with me. It'll only go up from here. Okay. I call this excerpt Moves and Countermoves. I wake up alone in my room. From the other room, I hear Keith and his girlfriend, Rachel. I try to listen to the closed door and deliriously connect the dots. From what I can gather, Mark has summoned Keith and is briefly explaining what happened. "I shot Paul. No, I'm not kidding. Come now." Rachel is arguing with Mark in the kitchen, ordering him to call the cops immediately. There is something huge behind my ear, a bulge the size of a jawbreaker. It hurts to the touch, and I fear the worst. It's the bullet that ripped through my brain but slowed at the last moment, unable to break through the last bit of skull and skin. I feel around to confirm. There is no exit wound. I can't quit fussing with it. I try to lean up slowly and eventually get up to walk. Everything is less wobbly, but more painful now. First the door frame, a checkpoint, something to lean on, and then the hallway, another checkpoint, and finally the kitchen, where the 3 of them are still arguing. I rest on a chair. It's from the same set as the one that broke my fall after the shot. Mark, Keith, and Rachel are around our island, eyes like flashlights. No one can believe I'm walking. I'm sure there's blood all over my face. I messed up. My life is over. I'm going to be scrubbing toilets for the rest of my life. Mark repeats again and again to himself like a prayer. We are all pale, though perhaps me most of all. Keith and Rachel, surely frozen in shock themselves, want Mark to be the one to call for help, to own what he's done. He insists he will, but does not. More time passes, 10 minutes, 15, tense silence. Rachel gives Mark an ultimatum. Call now, or I will. Mark says, just hold on. Give me a little bit. Rachel starts crying, shouting in hysterics. You shot Paul, she says. You shot him. You shot him, Mark. You shot him. Call the fucking ambulance. But I know that my mom and I can't afford an ambulance to take me to the hospital. I'd rather hide my gash than make her pay a single penny. I was still convinced I'd be fine. I press on the bulge behind my ear to see if it's still there. It's sensitive and swollen. I almost pass out again. I will, Mark says. Just wait. Give me another second. Just one more second. I wait for it to kick in. Their voices are shallow, frozen ponds. Little brittle things, crackling into splinters and shards and smaller pieces, sharp enough to puncture. Rachel goes to Keith's room to cry. I think it hits her even more when she notices the holes in the wall. It's now just after 8 p.m. Keith, Mark, and I are still around the kitchen island with the intensity of a cult, the three of us forming a summoning circle. Not much has been said since Rachel left the room. Hands on faces, fingers running through hair, eyebrows hiked up as if stuck with tape. I am spellbound, in an unexpected daze, bracing my elbows over the counter to shift some weight off my slinky legs. Idle pain, staticky stillness. Something is bound to happen soon. It has to. I think, take everything in, friends. This is the last time we will ever all be in the same room together. We can't come back from this. I know they are thinking it too. Mark declares he and Keith will drive to Home Depot and get supplies to fix the walls. Wood filler and paint. Cover and heal the holes, make them blend in with hue. No one has to know, he says. And I'll stop there.
Does this work? Do you want, folks want mics? Do we sound good?
Is this on?
Yeah.
You good? You want them?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm just gonna ask a couple questions. All right, so, when you read the jacket copy of a book like Friendly Fire, you imagine a particular tone, or at least I imagine a particular tone. You imagine something harrowing and resilient. And your memoir is exactly that. That's exactly what I thought while reading the book. But it's also very, very funny. Not what you read just now.
I was going to say, so that was a bad example of humor. But it's there, trust me, it's there.
Well,
He's saying it, it's there.
I think it would be hard to make that seem funny.
Well, that's, and also, this is obviously the most important talk happening between two people and two microphones happening tonight. I think that's fair. So you're in the right place, everybody.
It's the most lighthearted one, that's for sure.
100%.
So your book is really funny as well, and I wondered if you could talk about your decision to incorporate humor throughout a book like this. Is that something that came naturally to you, or is that a conscious decision you made while writing?
Yeah, so I love also subverting expectations. And so when I saw this question, I was really excited about it, just because I think my job as a writer was to throw you something different than you expect. So anyway, that's just that. But I think I just have a specific sense of humor that's just natural. And my family here can all attest probably that I just had this humor. It's just, yeah? It's my natural reaction to most things. And it's always helped me I don't want to say stand out, but it's helped me I don't know, make a name for myself, even just in school or anything really. And so I never once thought I'm going to put a joke here and it's going to kill. Never did that. It all came natural. And basically what happened was my agent, who's also a fantastic editor, her name's Michelle. I'm sure she'll come up a lot during this. I'll say Michelle, and that's who I'm talking about. She basically just helped me balance everything. So if I was being too snarky, if it got to the point where it was unsincere humor, she'd be like, let's roll back. And there were times where she added levity and said, let's punctuate this with something funny. And so then I would add it there. But yeah, I actually have a quote, if you don't mind me reading, from George Saunders, who will come back again to. He's a writer that you probably most know. And he has an essay called On Humor. And so this is what I will read. For me, humor comes out of this notion. Life is one thing, and our approach to it often pretends that it's something else. Something tidier and more in our control. When life reminds us that it is not tidy and not in our control, that's funny. It's the truth startling us, coming at us a little more abruptly than usual, even rudely. Life saying, I am not what you think I am. So basically what I take from that is humor is telling the truth quicker than people are used to. And I think that's what my voice does in Friendly Fire.
Well, I love your answer, and you just all really got the experience of having Paul as a student, where it's like you ask a question and he did research. I'm like, oh my God, you have a quote? This is unbelievable.
I wrote all my answers down, so to make sure you guys got your money's worth. Being almost free.
Well, and I love the humor in the book because it reminded me of you as a student, and then I love I think your mom says in the book like, oh, you twinkle. Is
right.
And I love that where it's like, oh yes, that's exactly what shines through in the book throughout. It's just so great. So one of the other aspects I really loved about the book was the structure.
Yeah.
So it's fragmented for those of you who haven't read it, and each of the book's chapters, they're really, really short. They tend to run 2 to 4 pages each, and you're bouncing around constantly between the shooting and surgery to litigation and family birthdays. It's like heavy topics, light topics, we're just going around constantly, and I really liked that kind of galaxy structure for the memoir. And I'm wondering, was this always the structure of the book? Were there other discarded structures? And what drew you to this final structure?
Yeah, so if I miss anything, just let me know. But the fractured structure was there from the beginning because the form dictated, my injury dictated the form. So I mentioned in the book that a lot of the time when I could sit down to write, it was for maybe just 20-minute spurts here and there. And so like these little chunks of the story would just appear and would accumulate. It was hard for me to focus. So the fracture works both as the fracture was the injury, the fracture was the friendship, the fracture was the chapters, and so it just becomes this really harmonious thing. And I did try, after the fact, to put holes. For those of you who don't know, holes is like the story of the shooting and like the immediate stay at the hospital. I tried putting that as one long chapter, and it was painful to read. Like my agent said, we can't do that. And I have an essay coming out tomorrow that I'll again briefly read from that sort of explains more about that. My book is not strictly in chronological order, especially in part 1, where the chapters alternate between advancing the thread of the shooting, the chapters labeled Holes Part 1 through Part 27, and another tangentially related chapter, often from my past that is connected in some way. It is as if someone found all 90-some fractures scattered on the ground and decided to lay them out thematically in a way that riles up the most energy, extrudes the most feeling, and best represents the story overall. Or at least that's what I had in mind when I organized the book. The alternating helps too in breaking up the intensity, the emotional toll of reading about the shooting all the way through, which I've been told to be a bit much. Instead, the way it's laid out stretches and prolongs the tension over many pages in a more positive, page-turning kind of way. And as you mentioned, you'll be reading about like the body images I struggled with in my teens while simultaneously wondering in the back of your mind if Mark is going to call the damn cops, that sort of thing. And then it just kept growing too. So my original intention was for it to be much shorter, but then things kept happening. So yeah, the like part 1 of the book was what I thought the whole book was going to be, and then not to spoil anything, but then like a certain insurance company comes into the fold and stretches the book out for 4 years. So.
Well, it's an amazing decision too because it keeps the reader really engaged because there's moments where your anxiety rises as you're reading the book, and then right when it gets to kind of a fever pitch, you shift into something lighter. But the reader always remembers that, like, okay, well, for you, this was a straight line, So for the writer, there wasn't just a break in the middle of the surgery of like, hey, here's some fun thing that happened, and I think that really kind of, encapsulates what you're doing in the memoir. So let me ask you too, I think there might be a temptation with a book like this to make it cynical or even dark, but I was just blown away by how hopeful the memoir is. This is a memoir about you being shot, and it's hopeful. And I'm just really moved by that, truly. And it's honest, but it doesn't wallow, and it wants to believe in a brighter tomorrow, and I love that. And I'm wondering, was that strain always there too, or did that come later?
Most of it was there. Like the humor bit, I'm just like a naturally optimistic person, and I think my voice, like what you get in the book is me. Like some authors will say like, with fiction, it's like, of course, there's characters and psyches and what have you, but like with a memoir, I wanted this to be me. Like you're like in my head while you read this book. And also, my agent calls me, I wrote this word down because she went to NYU and she's very smart, equanimous. So that means fair and composed. So she says I'm overly fair to Mark in the book.
I think that's accurate.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I acknowledge that that's, like, sure, I agree with that. But, like, I don't sugarcoat anything, but surely I give leeway to him a lot. Yeah, but unfortunately, I just am that sincere as a person.
But it makes sense where it's like you're youthful, you're like the end of adolescence is tied to this other person,
Yeah.
right? And then it ends in a really shocking way. Like it makes sense that you would be fairer than anyone else reading the book.
Right. Yeah, so I was 22, like you said, so yeah, the youthful, sort of like shimmering privilege of youth is a quote from the book, I think. But also, to go back to your question, the only time that I actually had to like be told to hold back some of the more anger bits was to the litigation chapters. People were like, you're too angry right now, we have to edit this, we have to come back to this, like you need more distance. So like we had to wait to write those more thoroughly.
Yeah, and that's kind of, it's hard to say which part is the most painful, but that part is just so shocking on top of the shocking opening.
Yeah.
It's just so surprising, I think, to people who are not experienced with this world. I know that was the thing I didn't expect going into the book.
Yeah, you never like see that sort of parts of the world, like the strip mall clinics.
Yeah, oh my God.
Were just bizarre experiences. I felt like I was in like a liminal space. Like I was like, this is not a real place on earth, because these people are essentially telling you you're fine, nothing happened, and they're apparently psychologists, doctors, and their job, they've been hired by an insurance company to tell you you are fine. And so I had like maybe like 6 hours at least of that, and over multiple days, in multiple different locations, and it was like a part-time job doing that as part of my case.
When you describe them in such a shocking way of like they're doctors that are not there to heal you.
Yeah. You sign a waiver basically saying, I know you're not treating me.
Yeah.
Acknowledging it.
Yeah. So you should all read this book because it is so eye-opening and just illuminating if you don't know this process. I wanted to ask the TBI chapter near the end of the book. Mm-hmm. It differs from a lot of the other sections.
Yeah.
So generally there's a lot of memoiristic sections. This one almost feels like you stepping forward as the writer of the memoir and making the case for what this book is and what it can mean for readers. So it's kind of an active work. I'm wondering, was this chapter always in the book? Was it always near the end? And did your thoughts about what Friendly Fire was change from when you first started reading it, writing it to now? Like, and by Friendly Fire, I mean the book. Like what the book meant, did that change for you over the process of publishing?
I would say yes, but I'll go back to the first part of that question.
I'm sorry I asked you 35 questions.
Yeah, well, you're gonna have to we're gonna go through them again, because that was a lot of good stuff though. Like, not even my notes, whatever. Okay, firstly, that chapter is funky. You're right. You're so spot on to point that out, because it used to be, the chapter after it is like the taco chapter, but we're at the bar. And the most of the one that you're referencing was combined with that one. And basically the paragraph that stands out is me coming forth saying, I'm not a journalist, I didn't do research for this. And my agent was the one who said, let's get that in there. And we wanted to put it earlier in the book, as you mentioned, and then there was never a good time because we liked the urgency of being in present tense, going through holes, part one. We were like really pleased with how tight that was. So it kept getting pushed back. But yeah, we're basically, what Sal's referring to is there's a chapter that says, there's no bar graphs in this, there's no stats in this about gun violence, gun reform. There's just me. I will tell you my story. I'm like the sort of case study for my story. But we wanted to kind of announce that. Let's see here. We wanted the beginning to be really sensational, meaning like play up into the senses, and experiential. But to your question, if Friendly Fire changed, I would say yes, because I always wanted it to be like a work of literature, like just that can move someone in any way. Like that was my original goal, like have it be a work, it's full of energy, hence the tight chapters, run to be really energetic and hopefully like a work of art, But then, like, the advocacy stuff has now started to happen, where I've been tapped by, like, Brain Injury Association of America, and I've been making videos now for them, which they're not out yet, but, like, behind the scenes, that's what I've been doing. And so, like, realizing that it could be a tool like that has been a change over the span of the 6 years writing it.
Wow, and I imagine, like, unfortunately the book is, like, very prescient, right? And it's going to be prescient for a long time, you know, like, just from the point where I read it just a month ago, there's another school shooting.
Exactly.
So it's just like,
And
this is necessary.
I knew I would never be, like, a David Hogg.
Yeah.
Like, that's like, full out, like, activism. I feel like I'm, like, more of a quiet activist, where I can provide the people who can change things, I can provide them with a tool. And they can read my book, and they can take from it what they want, what they will, and then go from there. You know, I call myself, like, a quiet advocate.
Well, the book is your activism. You know,
Exactly.
and the book will be on shelves for years after
Yeah,
this.
I've been told nonfiction is a long, slow
Yes.
burn, so let's maybe speed that process up a little bit tonight. I heard they printed a lot of copies, so figure that out.
There's some up there, right?
I've heard through the grapevine. Let's get this going. I'm gonna start this train.
All right, let me ask you, so all writing requires vulnerability, you know, so it's like one of the first things you learn, that's one of the first things you tell students, but especially so in memoirs. We were just talking
Yeah.
about this over dinner.
Yeah.
But this is one of the most vulnerable books I've ever read. Was being this open ever difficult for you? You know, are you worried about how people are going to react? Are you excited? Is it a mixture of both? Like, how does it feel to know this thing that's been inside of you for so long?
Yeah.
It's over there.
Yeah,
you know,
that's
it's
wild.
physical.
It's wild. Yeah, so it's definitely a mix of both, because, like, when you speak on guns, even though I never even say, like, anything, like, overly radical about guns in my book, there's going to be a certain person who comes out. I've never gotten hate mail, though, yet. Like, I've had pieces come out all over the place about guns, about disabilities. I've only ever gotten very moving people telling me their own stories with disabilities and things like that. So that will probably change now that the audience might have grown. But yeah, I've mentally prepared for that for sure. But alternatively, I'm willing to get the disability people who either caretakers or people who have suffered a TBI themselves. I'm really looking forward to all that. Vulnerability. Okay, so I think there's a couple types of vulnerability in my book. There's like the superheroifying of my story. A bullet literally bounced off my head after making contact with my skull bone. So, like, that's like almost a cool vulnerability, I would say. It's pretty badass. I don't think that's talked about enough. Like, that's pretty remarkable. Anyway.
That would be a great title for the book. An alternate title would be "It was pretty badass."
that'll be the UK. I'm trying to get a UK deal. I have to wake up at 6 in the morning tomorrow. I have an interview with the BBC tomorrow morning. So wish me luck for that. Thank you. But then there's also, like, the vulnerability. This is the second kind, where I'm trying to convince you to trust me. So I show some, shitty moments too, because, like, I wanted to be very honest about what TBIs can do, and, like, the perfect storm of TBIs and PTSD, they do, some pretty mean things. So I wanted to be honest about all that and show what that looks like. And then there's the vulnerability that, this is kind of a funny story. We talked about this a little bit. There's one chapter that I wrote, gave a clean once-over, and then just accepted every change that any editor who ever looked at it, and I just never looked at it again. And you'll know if you read it, there's like a pretty, serious, I don't know what you want to call it, but there's a chapter about, like, body image and self-esteem issues, and I'm so cringe to me, and I will not read that chapter ever. That's the only thing that I'm like, get away from me, but anyway.
But it's so good that that's out in the world, because I feel like other readers need to see that.
Yeah.
And body image that way is not often shown from a male perspective. But
Yeah,
just wrestling
I think
with
so.
it. So I just think it's going to be really great for when younger people, even younger than you, read it.
Yeah, exactly. And that was partly why I included it, and the other reason why I included it was just because I think it explains so much of, like, my mental state throughout the book and my psyche and why I do things the way I do things. I think you need to know sort of my whole story. And again, you mentioned this too at dinner, like, stuff with my family's in the book. That needs to be in there, I think, just because I needed to show it so people could understand the all-encompassing story.
And they become a character in the book. I
Yeah.
felt like I know every one of them earlier.
I believe
It's just like there's such a great support network.
I did my job.
Yeah, they're vibrant on the page, which
Yeah,
I think is
thank
hard
you.
to do with family too, but you did it.
Thank you.
So the book it's terrifying and human and very moving, but it's also a call of action. It's a call for action in a way, in a really significant way, I think. And I'm curious, what do you hope readers do after finishing your book? Do you have an idea in mind? Do you want it to change their hearts? Do you want them to actually go do something? How do you envision that, and what's your hope?
We kind of talked about the quiet advocacy a little bit, but even I can go further. Even I want people to come away with just anyway. First of all, if you're emotionally moved at all, even to anger, great. That's all you can really ask for as a writer. I think you would agree that just moving someone, it's like the George Saunders thing is they go in a black box and they come out different on the other side. That's great. With words, that's amazing. Okay, if we're gonna add some layers to that now, sure, I want you to think more critically about basic human rights and basic human kindness, and just be grateful for your own unique brand of misfortune and opportunity that your life allows you. That's some more umbrella universal things. But like I said earlier, I think this could potentially be a tool for the people with louder voices than mine. As an introvert, I think I did my part, and now they kind of have to take the baton and run with it. I'm not nervous right now at all, but I just don't I'll stay at home. I'll write.
It's the worst. All writers are oh God, now I gotta
This is fine. I could do this again, but would I want to? Not really. It's not my everyday thing that I want to do.
It's very different than the act of writing, right? Which is solitary and it's you're in your head a lot. So it's very different.
Yeah, but the cool thing is the virtual me, the disability advocacy, I think can become really cool, and it's just sort of happening. I have this dream scenario where I get a UK book deal, and then Emilia Clarke, who founded Same You, because she had a couple strokes involved in Game of Thrones, so she's got a TBI charity that's UK only right now. I'd love to bring that over here in some capacity. So, I don't know. That's just something I'm thinking about.
And TBI, for those of you that don't know, is traumatic brain injury.
Right.
I'm sure.
Sorry. Yeah.
So, I think one of the most difficult tasks that modern writers face is how to render therapy on the page. Because more and more of us are going to therapy.
Shout out to all the therapists here tonight.
Yeah. Shout out to thank you, therapists.
I know there's a lot of you here. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you. So it's something that more and more writers are trying to render. We should render it. It's a real part of life, right? It's like going to the dentist.
And you write about it as well.
Oh, yes.
So
yeah, I'm thankful my therapist is not here because he shows up in all my stuff all the time. Put him right in, so he doesn't need to know about that. Let's hope he doesn't buy the book. So it's you have to. But I think with therapy, I think the trick, or a pratfall, is it's very easy to become didactic or cliched, or to just have the therapist explain the subtext of the book. It's here comes the therapist to explain the problem, and we're done. We can get out of the book. Now, you don't do this at all. And I wondered how you approach the therapy sequences, or if you tackle them differently compared to any other scene in the book, because I just thought they were not used as exploitative. Exploitative is probably too strong, but they're not used as tools to explain the themes. They feel very accurately rendered on a page.
Yeah. That was my mindset the whole book. I wanted that whole book to almost read like a novel. And we always have a place, an image. I'm not an essayist, even though I've written essays. I don't consider myself an essayist.
You wrote a whole book. You can consider yourself
But I consider it creative nonfiction.
Yeah.
I think of it as genuinely, I think it's different. Yeah. It's probably not, in the grand scheme of things. But I think of it as different. Even I think of memoirs as different, funny enough. I genuinely think this is it's its own thing. Because a memoir is ghostwritten, I'm a celebrity. When I was 8, I rode my bike. That's when I think of memoir. But I know, obviously, we'll talk later about this, but there's people out there expanding the genre, Carmen Maria Machado's amazing book.
Oh, yeah.
We'll talk about that later. Okay. And I never, but to me, essays are like, I'm in it's my brain in a white-walled room, and I'm just speaking to you. I didn't want to do that. There's always, if you read it, which you have, there's always an image, it plays on the senses. Even when I'm speculating, there's always like a bit, like a comedian would have a bit, like a stand-up routine. There's always like a bit, and like a pocket of energy from one thing to the next. And so I thought of therapy the same way. I wrote it as if it was any other chapter in the book. And I think it, like you said, I think it benefited from that.
Yeah, and I think the best nonfiction, or maybe the nonfiction I like best, uses the tools of fiction, right?
Yeah,
so you're
100%.
using all of the tools,
Yep.
you know, the setting, scene, but you're able to incorporate a lot of rhetoric later in the book, and it's just not coming through the therapy avenues where we might traditionally think.
Yeah, and that was, and alternatively, like, I also just want to shout out, if you're like a writer, or anyone really, therapy's great, because like my therapy sessions were almost like a mini workshop.
Yeah.
Like we would talk, I'd have an epiphany, and then I'd go and put it somewhere in the book the next day. So it was like pretty spectacular.
I second this completely. I tell all my friends who are writers, like, you guys gotta go to therapy.
It's awesome.
Because I feel like people my age and older are like resistant. And it's like, and they're like, oh, that's the Pandora's box of my writing. I'm like, no, your writing is gonna get 10 times better the moment you go. So just do it selfishly for your writing if you don't care about yourself. But you should care about yourself. You know, maybe you will after therapy. But I agree completely.
So good.
I always tell students that too. I'm like, you should think about going to therapy. It's good.
100%.
So, you know, when I knew you as a student, you know, which unbelievably almost 10 years ago.
We were talking about that. You were like my age when you taught me.
Yeah.
And I'm picturing me being a professor. I'm like, oh, I feel so bad for those people.
No, you research it all. Look at this. You would be fantastic.
Fine, I got George Saunders quotes. It's like ace up my sleeve.
That's half the battle sometimes. You'd be great. But when I knew you as a student, you know, you were primarily a fiction writer, you know, and you loved George Saunders, you know.
Yeah,
which
we talked about
is
that.
so funny that but he pops up in this book as a kind of Yoda-esque figure, which
Yeah.
I also thought was very, very you. And
Yeah.
do you want to talk about Saunders before I go there?
We sent him a hardcover, and I've been in contact with him a little bit. We wanted to get a blurb, but he stopped blurbing.
Oh.
But that's fine. So he's awesome. He always responded to my letters, and I think as like now someone who has written a book, I'm gonna like make sure I always do that too, because that was such a special thing. Even I wrote him even right after the accident, or I should say the unintentional shooting, because accidents can be prevented. So I'm gonna try to change that language. So the unintentional shooting, I wrote him right after Lincoln in the Bardo had just come out, and he responded like that. And then I wrote him when I got the Roxanne Gay publication. He responded like that. And same thing with after I said, hey, my book's out now. He's like, I remember you. So anyway, shout out to George Saunders.
Wow, that's terrific. I mean, it's so important for us to have stars to steer by it like that, you know. Well, you know, you loved Saunders when you were a student. You still love him, and you were primarily a fiction writer when I knew you as a student.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, now that you've written this important and personal memoir, do you want to return to fiction, or do you see yourself more as a creative nonfiction writer now? Do you want to do all the genres, or do you want to dabble?
Yeah, so I definitely focused on fiction in college because my intentions were to pursue an MFA in fiction. And then, like, sure, I didn't get accepted, obviously. Like, my fiction wasn't superb by any means. But then
It was very, very good.
It was okay. It was okay. But I want to say, but then when I was going to apply, then I got shot. So that's the real reason I didn't get it. No, I'm just kidding. I would have gotten it.
That is the real reason why.
I was making an acceptance joke. They take like 6 people a year. It's really hard to do. But the weird thing is I saw this question and I'm like, wait a minute. In high school, I mean, everyone writes poems in high school. But I wrote like over 300 poems in high school. I wrote, unprompted, satirical essays. Like almost that you would find in like McSweeney's. Like that sort of like jokey, what have you. And then also, I looked this up, I wrote 30,000 words of fiction while writing Friendly Fire. And I published 15 short stories while writing Friendly Fire.
Well, I think they would have let you into the MFA.
Well, maybe now. Maybe now. Yeah, I mean, what are you gonna do? But like, so basically, I think of myself as, I guess I've always been a multi-genre writer. But yes, with a focus in fiction at the time, and now my catalog is vastly nonfiction, of course. But as I mentioned just a minute ago, I think my next big project will either be a story collection, which I'm technically a third of the way through, but I know you have thoughts about like a linked collection, and that yours is beautifully, at least thematically linked, if not straight up linked, which you could argue it is. But yeah, anyway, fiction, big project, definitely fiction. Next.
Do you want to link the story collection, or do you want to keep them like separate?
Well, so you turned me on to Edgar Corrette and Amelia Gray, and those are wonderful flash fiction writers, and their collections are more the hodgepodge stew. And I write, my fiction is primarily shortish, kind of like the chapters in my book. And so yeah, mine would be a hodgepodge. I think it'd have to be.
Well, I wouldn't say hodgepodge, because stylistically I think yours
Sure.
would be very linked. Just
Sure.
like those were.
You're right, they are. They're all kind of about like, well, never mind. Oh, ask me later if you want to know.
Writers hate talking about the next project. It's like,
Yeah.
please don't ask me.
Yeah. Ask me later. I'll tell you about it. They're all. I like writing speculative fiction, obviously, because there's speculative elements in my memoir as well. So I love writing ghost stories, modern fairy tales, that sort of thing. And yeah, they're all about 1,200 words.
Great. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to turn it over to all of you. So if you have questions, please raise your hand and just ask Paul.
Sal will call on you.
I won't call him.
He's a teacher and he's good at that.
Well, I don't know if I'm good at it. I can do it.
He's great. He's
Thank
not good, he's great.
That's very sweet. So last question from me, and then I'll be quiet. Were there any writers who were inspirations to you while working on the book? So obviously Saunders, but I'm just curious, like, who else, like when you imagine your book kind of shelf, who's next to that? Who's next to the book?
I sort of subliminally messaged people on my social media by stacking it next to Edgar Corrette, because he's got a great memoir, The 7 Good Years, which I think if you like mine and you read mine, then you can read his too. Because it's darkly funny and the chapters are really short, and so they're kind of similar. But obviously, like, so I picture me kind of in that conversation. I read all of Saunders' nonfiction. He's got that great collection from when he had the GQ articles.
Yeah.
They got so those are great.
What is that called, just so we can...
The Brain Dead Megaphone.
Yes, thank you, yeah.
That's fantastic. And especially like his really long ones, like from GQ, those are must reads. And you should subscribe for free to his Substack Story Club. The On Humor thing I quoted is from Story Club. And it's just a free resource of him just unleashing these like wild bits of information on you. It's like, I still feel like I'm in school when I read them. And then obviously, like, I have to shout out Roxane Gay for publishing Public Safety. I was like in the middle of my case, so I couldn't post on social media, but all of a sudden I had like 1,000 followers on Twitter, and I was like, damn, that really like kickstarted my career. And then when I could actually nurture that, I was like, I wouldn't be here without her. So it was a great honor to be the first essay in that.
She shepherded so many.
She's an amazing, for emerging writers, she's like, I think, one of the best, like, super famous people to nurture those young careers. Because I'm not even close to, like, she's been doing this for like 20 years at least. Yeah, very, very cool. I already mentioned The 7 Good Years by Edgar Corrette. And then I also wanted to shout out just like flash fiction in general. I think more people need to read flash fiction. On Twitter, I guess we won't go there. What, X now? There's this really dedicated flash community, and like I'm knee deep in that. Like I wouldn't have sold half as many books today without that community. So like Smoke Long Quarterly is a must read. Like there should be no question. You have to read every Smoke Long Quarterly piece. They'll change your life. And like the name is that you can read it in the time it takes you to have a cigarette. Like, and your life will be changed after that. Like what? For free? Okay. Wigleaf, Pithead Chapel, Waxwing, Necessary Fiction, which you're also a contributor in. And you're a contributor of Wigleaf too, as well, obviously. And a new one that's specifically nonfiction is Autofocus. They also do books. Their books are fantastic. Monkey Bicycle is been around forever. Split Lip. Brevity is another nonfiction specific one. I'll have an interview with my agent in Brevity in October, so keep an eye out for that. if you're not reading those places, you're seriously missing out. They're all free. Like, just read flash fiction. It's a whole story in under 1,000 words.
Great.
So
I want to ask you like 5 more questions, but I'm like, I know I cannot, so I'm going to.
if they come up later.
Yeah, I might have one more, but I might go look it up. But what questions do you all have for Paul? What would you like to hear Paul discuss and talk about?
I see you back there.
I've got all kinds of questions.
I know you do. Good to see you, Adrian.
Well, having not read the book, that entire intro, was there ever discussion about calling 911 for medical?
So
Because
it's
the cops aren't going to get to bring the board out.
it's a long story, really. Like, so basically, like, it was hard to convince him to get help at all. And public safety came, and he like lied to get him to go away. So like, help was not coming unless he owned up to it. And then of course I was just like in a state of shock where I couldn't really do anything. But yeah, I mean, just read the book. Can I swear? It's fucked up. Just read the book. It's hard to explain. Yeah.
Hey, Paul. I was just wondering, did you like just wake up one morning and go, I mean, it sounds like you've always been a writer, you've always thought like a writer. I mean, at what point along this journey did you kind of go, I think I could write about this?
Mm-hmm.
And also when you did, was it healing somehow or not?
Yeah, great question. So I started writing the book 2 weeks after I got shot. I mean, this was going to happen. Even my mom can attest. Like the nurse who took care of me in the ICU or whatever, my like recovery room, like got me a journal because she knew I was a writer. She knew I was going to like start jotting some notes down. So that was, I mean, yeah, and obviously like even in like high school, I knew I wanted to go to. Well, actually, I wanted to be a musician. So. She's the reason I got accepted to music school for guitar performance, and my mom's like, you should really consider being an orthodontist. I strongly recommend you go into dentistry. And I was like, let's meet in the middle. But can I be a little artsy? I can at least be like a marketing copywriter thing, which I was briefly in the book. You'll read about that. So yeah, writing was always the thing after. Guitar was always the thing. What was the rest of it? If it was guitar.
Was it healing? Yeah, was it
So I think it was by default, but I also like to separate them. So like I told Sal, I think therapy is good for its own reasons, and I think therapy can in fact help your writing. And yes, like people can write, you can journal for catharsis, but I did it to create a literary work, and so I wanted to keep that separate in my mind. And I also wrote about therapy, so like I get that it's like super intertwined, and it's like, yeah, of course it helped because like it helped reprocess. Like I did like a PTSD therapy that helped reprocess things, and writing is like almost the same thing. You become in control. You're the dominant voice. Like I can kind of control how Mark played on the page, and I can control when I write about him and what he says, even though of course it's all factual, but like, you know, who's going to remember exactly what he said? I can kind of, although I did use text, like it's all like pretty verbatim, which is kind of fascinating. But yeah, thank you for that question. It helped, but maybe not in the way you would think, because I never really journaled, but yeah, they're tied together.
You can ignore this person, but the 20 minutes writing blocks that you had.
Yes.
That was probably by necessity at the time.
Yeah, the form definitely dictated the short nature of the chapters.
Do you think any of that stuck, like from style, like maybe like got something?
Well, yeah, like I write, even my fiction typically is under 1,000 words. Like that's the fiction I like to consume, the fiction I like to write. And we were talking about this at dinner. There are some literary journals, some very prestigious ones, still don't allow flash fiction. And I think that's a big barrier because people like me then can't submit. I have one story that's like 5,000 words, okay? But like, most of my stuff is under 1,000. And if they're not gonna publish that, or if they're not going to let me submit that, I call myself a disabled writer. I'm cognitively disabled, I am emotionally disabled. and physically disabled, and so that's like a barrier for sure. But then a lot of prestigious ones do allow flash fiction.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering about your memories
Mhm.
within, of course, the event itself.
Yeah.
But also just what you chose to include in the book. I haven't read it yet, but
Mhm.
I will be reading
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for writing it.
No problem.
So when you, obviously I don't have experience with
Mhm.
a brain injury
Mhm.
or PTSD, and so I just wonder how clear events were to you, especially being in a state of
Yeah.
of shock at the time, how long it took you to remember things clearly, or if
Mhm.
it was instantaneous, and especially with things not connected to the events that you chose
Yes.
to include in the book. What was the thought process? Was it you had a memory and you're like, this will work?
Yeah, right,
Let's
right.
go with this.
Yeah, great question, actually. That's an awesome question. This is going to sound funny. So writing about trauma is weird, right? Okay, so I wrote a lot of the Holes chapter, what you could call the trauma chapters, right? Really soon after the event happened, so that probably helped too, of remembering them. But also, I was disassociated from the event. And so people tell me, was it traumatizing, was it re-traumatizing to write it? Well, no, because I still didn't even really know what had happened. I was writing it from almost a third person, as if I could see the events like a movie, and I was just transcribing it, which is why there's so much detail you'll see. I've been told that Holes is it's a minute by minute, it's a play-by-play of the event, and then, the 7 days I was in the hospital. But yeah, as far as memories go, I always wanted to make sure they were thematically linked to the chapter either right before or right after. So if basketball is even briefly mentioned in my hospital, maybe I have no good example. The Love Your Melon is a local, they do the knit hat thing. Okay, so they had this Timberwolves hat, and I'm mega Timberwolves fan. And so Elisa here helped me secure some of those limited edition hats while I was in the hospital because they had to shave my head. And so then the next chapter is about why I love the Timberwolves, a memory from my childhood about why basketball means so much to me, and when I used to play, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, they're always linked. Thank you. A great question.
And that's such a great kind of shift in the book because at that moment you can't play basketball.
Right.
Yeah,
It's
so
because my mom says I ask her how long do you think it'll be, and you go probably 6 months at least. So it's it's supposed to kind of hit you right in the feels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm so excited to read your book.
Thank
This
you.
is my 9th book I've read of memoirs of brain injury.
That's fantastic. Well,
I
you
mean,
know what I
I
mean.
teach neuroscience, so that's
Yeah.
the backdrop. But one thing, I know we have a lot of future healthcare providers who are probably going to be reading the book. And I'm wondering what you would
Great.
like them to take away from it. I read an expert, I think it's probably a neuropsychologist, who kind of grew up.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, and my mom could probably speak to that too. That.
I'm not speaking.
Well, I don't mean that. Oh God.
We won't make you. We won't.
It was a funny moment, is all. My mom talked she was gonna punch this vocational examiner. It's in the book. You're funny. She's from Detroit. She's a hard ass. She's great. My mom was always the enforcer throughout this whole thing, so it was great. But yeah, that was weird. And then it's extra weird too because then I had people who it was their job to intimidate me in the same test, right? The same vocational exams. Geez, I mean, I guess patience is probably the single most greatest gift you could give someone with a TBI. And repetition was always really hard for me too. When I lived in an apartment for a good chunk after my brain injury, and my neighbor would just blare things, and it's hard to get good sleep. I know you're very much into sleep, and so yeah, I know this is more what you should do with the TBI, but you want for the healthcare professionals, yeah, just realize that person's life is like dramatically different now. And like I would say patience above all else, and just like I don't want to put words in that person's like mouth or give them like any crap, because like who knows what they were going through that day. But yes, I had like a one crappy experience. So I don't know. I don't want to like tell her that she did a bad job or anything. It's hard to say.
I think you're allowed to say that.
Okay, well,
She
I don't know.
But
It's
that,
tough.
that part is the consistency. Pretty much all these memoirs I've
Yeah.
read have one or two care providers that just make this experience so miserable. And
Yes.
it's such an important.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, yeah. I guess I would like them to know like this person's life just got dramatically altered. They don't even realize maybe by how much yet. Like, just I mean, this is like a universal thing. Just have empathy. Like treat people with care. Like as much as you can. And even that's something I obviously have to remember too. But it's just like, oh boy, like yeah, stuff. Hey Rick.
One more question. No pressure.
So how do you make your way through that process? Because the injury itself and the ongoing recovery, or to the degree that you can recover, how is all that negativity coming back at you from care impact that process of recovery, if you actually really can't even recover from that? And you find yourself doubting like, maybe I'm not really injured. Did you ever feel that way?
I knew I was injured.
Yeah, but
No,
you can always feel
No, I know.
something.
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty steadfast. Like,
And your
there's
mother-
someone in the room who can tell you.
And your mother.
There's a couple people who can tell you. I treated that very seriously, and it's a full-time. It's a job to do those things. But like, yeah, some tips I got was just like cardio is really good for after TBI. The more oxygen, the better to your brain. But you had a more specific thing. What was the more specific thing right off the bat?
Well, I guess, how did you get yourself through that with all that impact going one direction which you knew?
Yeah, right.
And maintaining that and then being calm.
Yeah, I was not calm. I beat the shit out of a dishwasher. But no, the Timberwolves, unironically, like this is dead serious. Commiserating with how shitty that team was all those years was helped me. I could blame an external thing, be like, fuck it, Gorgie Jane traveled again, what the fuck? And I'm like, and all the while, I'm just like, it's actually been really beneficial, I think, to be able to communally hate something with other people. Now they're good, and I'm like, happy. But having something to be mad about is also kind of fun. But also, of course, the people in the front row here, like they're thanked in the book as many times as I could without bringing the word count up too much. I should say my agent, so the book was 100,000 words at one point, and she cut it down to 65,000 words. So it's really tight and really energetic. There's like lots of pockets of, I always say like, I want you to always be moving quickly through it, and like every paragraph I want there to be something that propels you forward. But yeah, it's largely due to these people up front that I sort of got through it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're finishing up, so thank you so much. This was tremendous. You're all great.